Evercade gets its first Neo Geo cartridge at long last, after the brand already appeared in Super Pocket form last month. For your money, you get 6 Neo Geo games, all of which were arcade titles at one point, which in theory should make them perfect for pick-up and play fun. So the first question on the minds of many fans is going to be, how well do the games run? And in the case of Ironclad and Metal Slug, unfortunately the answer is not too well. There's actually quite a lot of slowdown in both of these games, while the other 4 seem pretty fine. I would say that sometimes it is actually helpful for the game to slow down when there's quite so much going on the screen, especially in Metal Slug where it's usually boss battles where it gets really slow. But even so, a locked 60 frames a second at full speed would have been preferable. Now, I haven't played the original arcade AES version of these games, so I don't know whether this is just authentic, perfect emulation. This might be how the original hardware actually ran the games, but I do think that seeing as other similar games on Evercade do manage a locked 60 frames a second most of the time, I think this could have been a little better. As with the Neo Geo Super Pocket, there is some input lag. As you can see in this video that I've slowed down from 120 frames a second to 24 frames a second. You can see that there is a bit of a delay, but if I compare this to the Nintendo Switch 2 version of Metal Slug, and also the PSP version of Metal Slug, you'll see that actually the Evercade EXP is not quite as fast as the Switch 2, as you might expect, but it is faster than the PSP, so it's not too bad, especially as the PSP version is actually still perfectly playable even today. But technicalities aside, let's look at the games themselves. It must be said, 6 titles isn't very many when you consider that PSP collection had 16 games, and 4 of the 6 games on this cartridge were on that collection. Even so, you get plenty of arcade-tastic variety here, covering one-on-one fighting, horizontally scrolling fighting, a platformer, a scrolling shmup, a run-and-gun platformer, and a top-down shooter. A bit heavy on the shooting then, but that's what most arcade games did in the 90s, so it was always likely. First up is Ironclad, which is mostly a pretty generic shooter, but with an interesting robot mechanic, where you have a little robot buddy with you who acts as a sort of satellite, attacking enemies from afar, but you can also call it back to you, augmenting your ship's firepower and affording some special attacks. The game has a branching route system a bit like Outrun, meaning you won't be able to see everything the game has to offer on your first sitting, which is fortunate when continues are infinite as you keep pumping in the virtual coins thanks to emulation. The game does have some pretty severe slowdown and also just feels a bit messy at times, lacking the finesse of the genre's greatest, and even falling short of other Neo Geo shooters like Blazing Star. I would give this one 3.5 out of 5 in isolation. It's playable, but I just haven't found anything to really love about it. Next up, The King of Fighters 2000 was the last game that the original SNK company released before it went bankrupt, but it was the culmination of years of King of Fighters games, and so features a splendid roster of characters. However, even compared to its own predecessors, it's graphically disappointing, with very flat backgrounds. The animation, however, is very strong. I'm sure there will be plenty of other King of Fighters games on Evercade soon, but this one's a reasonable start. I have to say though, this too has not grabbed me, and I've had far more fun in the past with Real Bout Fatal Fury and King of Fighters 98, so I would give this one 3 out of 5. Next comes Magician Lord, which was one of the launch games for the Neo Geo AES system in 1990, and I can remember it being advertised in the back of Sega Power magazine when I was a kid in about 1992. Being one of the first titles for the MVS arcade hardware and the home console, it does show off the system's abilities reasonably well, only without the polish that came with later releases. Gameplay-wise, it feels a lot like Sega's Shinobi with side-scrolling platforming action that changes as you change your character's abilities with an orb system. There are lots of enemies on screen, though I don't like the constant appearance of these flying enemies, which are hard to hit, especially with the slight input delay. The game would be much more fun if you only had to deal with the enemies on the platforms. Instead, it's very difficult, very frustrating, and modern quality of life enhancements like more liberally scattered restart points would help a lot. Of course, Evercade does have save states, so you can make your own restart points, if you don't consider that cheating. Now, I've never loved this game, but after forcing myself to play it more for this review, it's not so bad. Nothing like Sega's best platformers, but still a decent 3.5 out of 5. Metal Slug is the 4th game on this collection, and it's simply an all-timer. Even today, the detail of its animation is pretty astonishing as enemies cut ropes, crawl under obstacles, and depart this mortal coil in absolutely horrific ways. The art style is stupendous, the versatility of the platforming and shooting is exemplary, and there's so much scope for skillful play, especially if you try to save all of the MIA soldiers and make it to the end of the stage without losing a life, which is far easier said than done. It's not the longest game we'll ever play, but it's always fun. This is the perfect game to have in your pocket, enjoyed with a friend on the Versus, or even just on attract mode on your Evercade Alpha. It's glorious. 4.5 out of 5. Sengoku is the 5th game, and it's an odd one. As with Magician Lord, there is a character switching system, which adds variety to the Streets of Rage-esque gameplay, but it's very clunky. Back in 1991 when it came out, its scaling visuals and large sprites would have looked amazing on a home TV, but today that's not enough to carry it and it just doesn't feel enjoyable. I give this one 2 out of 5. Finally, and I'm glad to say we're ending on an up note, Shock Troopers rounds things off with another excellent inclusion. I actually think I prefer this original over its sequel, Shock Troopers 2, as the graphics aren't trying to look like renders, instead embracing the pixel art aesthetic and doing so in superb style. The gunplay is enjoyable and satisfying, the enemies and environmental elements react really well to your blasting. While rival consoles had caught up to Neo Geo's arcade quality visuals by the time this game was released in 1997, it's still a very solid and enjoyable shooter. I give this one 4.5 out of 5 too. Now, I'm not just going to give an average of those scores here for the overall package because the value for money of the cartridge, the suitability of the Evercade platforms, and the input lag and slowdown all have to come into it. I do feel that the cartridge does the bare minimum needed to bring Neo Geo to Evercade, and the scant list of games is objectively questionable given the PSP compilation had 16 games 17 years ago and only cost about £5 more when that was new, though of course inflation would make that more expensive in today's money. This Evercade cartridge is still a rather diminutive offering though, and I would only really play Metal Slug, Shock Troopers, and maybe Ironclad in my own time, though I have also warmed to Magician Lord a little bit as well. So £25 for 2 great games, 2 decent ones, and a couple I don't really care for is a little on the expensive side. However, as a baseline of quality for these arcade collections, this is actually one of the stronger collections on Evercade. It is all very well made, well produced, decently presented, and they all play pretty well. So I give Neo Geo Arcade 1 a very respectable 3.5 out of 5. A good start for Neo Geo on Evercade carts. Well, if you enjoyed this video, you might be interested in seeing my special review of Roguecraft DX on Evercade, as well as my Evercade playlist. I do also make a regular series of videos called Sega Sundays, where I talk you through a classic Sega game from my collection every Sunday from 8 AM UK time. Well, thanks so much for watching. Take care until next time. Cheers.